Hello and welcome to episode 151 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay and me, Andy Leakes. Damien, welcome back. You've got a pained look on your face. What's the matter, mate?
Oh, Andy, I've had a mare this week. Well, I'm technically in bed doing the podcast, so I done my back in this week, and self-inflicted, not quite up there with my dad race hamstring pull story, but I sympathise with anybody out there who has a persistent back problem, because it is really debilitating when you have a bad back. And I did my back in the middle of the week.
Talk me through it. What happened?
Well, it was self-inflicted, but I basically did it at the gym. I did a new class that was... all my stories pretty much start like this, don't they? And self-inflicted pain. And anyway, I did a class, and it was one I hadn't done, kettlebells. And did this class, and actually, I was the only guy in this... It was only a small group of about 6-7 people. And when you get there, you have to choose the kettlebell you're going to use for the exercise. And I didn't know I didn't know the exercises. I can laugh now. I was going to do, and I was just being slightly gentlemanly and let the sort of ladies go first to pick their weight and take the one that I had. And
no, you weren't. You saw the ladies and thought, I'm going to show them what a kettlebell is, and took the largest one.
Andy, that's exactly what my wife claims, and and it wasn't. It wasn't that. And in the end, I obviously have to take responsibility for this, but I do blame the gym slightly, because there wasn't enough kettlebells for the one that I wanted. So in the end, I ended up having pretty much the only weight that was of sufficient size, let's say, to swing about, which in hindsight is the weight of 16 bags of sugar. It was great for lots of the exercises, and at the time I didn't really feel... I felt my back was a bit tight. I thought, yeah, it's quite hard work, this. Anyway, cut long story short, come the end of the day, the thing had seized up, and I was in agony.
Oh, right, so it didn't sort of like twang while you were doing it. It was
I didn't have to style it out like I did on the dad's race with the hamstring. I left and sort of thought, the back feels a bit tight, and it's good. Tough class, and then as the day went on, it got stiffer and stiffer. But obviously the
damage had been done.
The damage had been done, and the muscles were in spasm, and the pain down my leg and back, and it resulted, I didn't sleep at all for almost 2 days, because the pain, it was so painful, I couldn't find a comfortable position. And I was sat downstairs, basically in the dark, in a chair, because it's the only way I could get some minor relief, taking painkillers. And I tell you what, enough to drive you insane, sitting in the dark for like 7 hours. So it was a nightmare. So anyway, cancelled meetings.
What did you do? Box set, book, writing blogs? What did you do?
Do you know what I was trying to do? I thought I'm going to do something watch a Netflix box set or write something, and I just couldn't. I couldn't concentrate, and in the end, I just sat there in the dark.
Wow.
It's if you ever try that, it's painful on its own doing that, and anyway, 2 days down the line with anti-inflammatories and horse tranquilizers, I've managed to. I'm now mobile, and I think the worst will be behind me. But it did mean I actually missed a money video, which I was most disappointed about, which I'm going to try and catch up on my We Need to Talk About Money series. So we're pushing on. And I just want to actually give a shout out to Lee out there. Lee, who tweeted me when I happened to mention that I couldn't do the money video for that particular day because of my predicament. And he was very incredibly selfless in his sympathy for me, because the man has his own health issues. But it was good to put things in perspective. But it was nice. I wanted to just say hello to Lee, because he does listen to the podcast and he's a bit of a fan. And so we'll move on from my predicament. But on that note, we always ask for reviews at the end of the podcast, don't we, Andy?
We do, yeah.
But this week we had another cracking review, which I'm going to just run through. But it's to encourage people out there, please review the podcast, because it's helping us move up those charts.
And you might get read out on the podcast.
Which I'm going to mention this one now. So it's a 5-star review, and the heading is smart, funny and addictive listening to anyone interested in their financial future. So it already had the makings of a good review. And it said, I'm of a certain age where you start to look to the future and be concerned about how you will be able to provide for the family up to and into retirement. Not having a clue about personal finance, I stumbled across the brilliant Meaningful Money podcast. That's Pete, who is a friend of the show, which educated me about money and investing. I was intrigued by the possibility of investing and was recommended moneytothemasses.com as a way of further enhancing my financial education, and boy, what a recommendation. Andy and Damien are now a major part of my podcast diet. So, Andy, have you ever been a major part of anybody's diet? You are now. Their chemistry on the podcast is a joy to behold. There you go, Andy. Our friendship is a joy to behold and makes consuming financial news and information an absolute joy. Massive thank you, and keep up the good work, guys. Looking forward to joining the 80/20 investor revolution. Chris, P.S. Damien, be aware of the wasps, which is a reference to the, I think it was about episode, I don't know, near 100, where I got attacked by a wasp during the podcast. So please send in the reviews like that, because it's really helpful, and it's things like that help spur us on and keep us going, because when you're laid up in bed with a bad back, that sort of thing gets you out of the bed and stops you feeling sorry for yourself.
Good, lovely to hear. Well, let's get on with the money stuff. And so what have we got coming up on this week's show?
The first piece I'm going to do is a reflection on the current state of stock markets, but in particular, this week saw the anniversary of the Great Storm. Do you remember that? How old were you when the Great Storm happened, Andy, that blew down 15 million?
I think it was 88, wasn't it? Was it 88 or 87?
87.
I would have been just turned 8. Yeah, so the same age as my daughter, actually, yeah.
I was 9, so I vaguely remember. I do remember. I remember the next day going out and spending the day climbing felled trees, which was obviously wonderful. But at that same time, that 30th anniversary was this week, but there was also the 30th anniversary of Black Monday, which was the worst day in stock market history. And on that particular day, stock markets around the world plummeted. For example, in America, they fell by more than 20% in a single day. That is particularly relevant now because there are similarities between the stock market in the lead up to that event and now, with markets at all-time highs. And of course, there's been a lot of talk about, could it happen again? And is it likely to happen again? And this week for 80/20 investors, I look at that in detail in my weekly newsletter that goes out. And I also look at, should you be going into cash rather than investing ahead of that event, and that possible event, I should say. And also what's likely to happen afterwards, because based on history, there is some positive of a repeat of Black Monday. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a small part of that and just look at whether a Black Monday style event could in fact happen again. I'm also going to talk about, in a separate piece, about being overcharged on mobile phone contracts, which is a story that's gathered pace in the press this week. And finally, I want to touch upon a piece of research that has come out by the FCA, so the Financial Conduct Authority, which are the regulators, where they've looked into the state of the UK consumers' health and their vulnerabilities. And it's a good way of benchmarking yourselves really against the rest of the UK, just to see the state of the UK's finances really. So I want to make some comments on that. So should we go with the Great Storm and Black Monday?
Yeah, good stuff. Let's start with the Storm and Black Monday. And it's kind of weird, really, isn't it, that the two events happened so close together back then, and perhaps they're linked. Maybe you're going to tell me more about that. But also, you know, however many years on, 30 years on, we've had Hurricane Ophelia that kind of landed on the same date again. So you're going to tell us about that and forecasting whether it might happen again. And Damien, tell me about it.
What you've just mentioned there is a great example of history repeating. So now you said Hurricane Ophelia, then I suppose people became even more nervous with markets where they are now, which I'll come on to. But that is almost a great summary that history can repeat. So we are 30 years on from the Great Storm, when we had winds of 100 and I think it got up to 132 miles an hour that were recorded in the southeast. But obviously Ireland got hit by Hurricane Ophelia on the 30th anniversary of the Great Storm, and they weren't caught up in the Great Storm quite like the southeast of England. And part of the reason I think it got the name Great is because it hit a densely populated area, and we are more obsessed with, the news is focused towards the southeast. I know we live there, but it is, there's no denying that.
Well, funny you should say that, Damien. We live in the southeast and we live in Kent. I think the Great Storm was responsible for Sevenoaks almost having to be renamed, because I think Sevenoaks on that day became Two Oaks.
It did.
Or something like that.
It did, Andy. I think 5 of the oaks that made Sevenoaks that gave it Sevenoaks its name were destroyed. I don't know if they were replanted, and I think they were, maybe grew back. But yeah, the Sevenoaks, it could have renamed a whole town. What's interesting about the Great Storm and Hurricane Ophelia is that obviously they happened on the same day but 30 years apart. But it just shows that the unlikely events, those rare 1 in a 200 year events, do occur perhaps more frequently than people think, and can occur, the frequency can increase. Now, Ophelia was slightly different because it hit Ireland, and there were differences. It wasn't quite as bad in terms of wind speed, but almost. And it shows that things can repeat. So if we go to the stock market, so Black Monday, what happened on Black Monday? In the lead up to Black Monday, markets were fairly similar to now, where there'd been a strong bull rally. Our rally at the moment has been about 8 years long, since the financial crisis. Back then it was about 5 years, and it was still that buy the dip mentality. So when markets were dipping, people would just keep piling in as an opportunity to buy more stocks cheaper, so it would then buoy the market back up again. So there were similarities, and markets were looking expensive then as they are now, and in fact they are more expensive now than they were back then. So what happened is the trigger for this mass sell-off that started in Asia and then spread to the rest of the world. Obviously overnight it happened over in Asia to us, and then came to the UK and eventually America. No one is 100% certain what the trigger was, and there's been fingers pointed at early computer trading, because those were the early days of computer trading coming in. So that's trading carried out by algorithms, and they probably weren't understood quite as much as they are now, and the programs probably had less fail-safes in them, and there was less regulation and stuff that people point to as well. But one of the other culprits people have pointed at is something called portfolio insurance. So back in those days, what used to happen, when the market was going higher, people obviously becoming a little bit nervous, and they used to buy something called portfolio insurance. And in simple terms, what it was is a futures contract that enabled them to sell the market at an agreed price, so a lower price, before a certain date. So what it meant is if the market suddenly fell, they'd already bought a contract that they could then go, right, I can sell at this price to a certain person. That was the idea. But there was a whole wall of that insurance that had been bought. There was loads and loads and loads of it. But the problem was, when the market started to fall, you can see that all those sell instructions were triggered by these computers. And it becomes a vicious circle and a negative feedback loop, because as the first insurance policies were triggered, then they would sell out, but it would also trigger other ones that were set at lower prices. Can you see what I mean? And therefore, it became, everybody in the market effectively became a seller. And now if a market is full of sellers and no buyers, it means that the price will go down. It's that supply and demand equation. So the prices kept falling, but of course it got worse and worse and worse. It was amplified by this portfolio insurance. And in those days, there wasn't circuit breakers in the stock market. So what happened is, as it spread through Europe and into the UK, and interestingly, the Great Storm happened, I think it was on a weekend, and the first trading day back at work, the trading floors in the UK were largely empty because people were struggling to get into the city because there were trees all over the railway line, so that didn't help. And don't forget, in those days, the trading was far more centralised. There were fewer stock market indices, and there was less online trading. There weren't ETFs, those huge exchange traded funds that exist now. So it was a slightly different world, and that probably didn't help either. When it got to America, the stock market fell 20% in a day, and of course in the UK it had fallen by about 10-11% in the day, but when the market opened again the next day, it caught up with America, so it effectively was down 20%. So could it happen again? Now, a lot of people pointing towards this advent of circuit breakers. Now, they are a bit like if you go through your lawnmower electricity cable when you're in the garden, then the electricity power is meant to cut off, isn't it, if you have a circuit breaker to stop you killing yourself.
Yeah.
And there are these existing certain stock markets now to stop a run like happened on Black Monday. So, for example, in some exchanges in America, they might trigger if a stock falls by, say, 10%. But what it will do is the different circuit breakers will suspend trading for a period of time, and that might be an hour or whatever. But ultimately, you still can theoretically get a 20% fall in the day, by which point the stock will be ceased to be allowed to be traded on that day. So In 2015 in China, there was their equivalent of Black Monday, and they had a big sell-off and loads of different stocks. The market had got all carried away. It was a bit of a bubble. And these circuit breakers were being hit all the time. And at one point, I think about a third of the market wasn't allowed to be traded anymore. And, of course, today we have far more short sellers. Now, these people are people who can bet against the market. The financial instruments that exist now mean that people can actually bet against the market and drive it lower. So they make more money the further the market falls, rather than just in the past where you might bet on a stock rising and have these sort of insurance policies that would get you out the market if it started to fall. We now have a different beast. The portfolio insurance disappeared, but it started to creep back in a different guise. And we have versions which actually start to bet that the market's going to keep falling. So it's almost like following momentum downwards. And that could amplify the issue. Now, the people point to tighter regulation. That's, for example, those circuit breakers and other type of regulation that might limit the likelihood of such an event. And they also point to things like that stock markets now are more sort of decentralized. And in America at the time, there was only really 2 major indices. Now there are many, many more. Now, my take on it is, if you remember Michael Fish on the eve of the Great Storm, he infamously did a weather forecast, didn't he, where he... actually, Andy, you could play it. Play it now for people if they haven't heard it before, and you'll hear what I mean.
Earlier on today, apparently, a woman rang the BBC and said she heard that there was a hurricane on the way. Well, if you're watching, don't worry, there isn't. But having said that, actually, the weather will become very windy, but most of the strong winds, incidentally, will be down over Spain and across into France.
Now, Michael, that clip has haunted Michael Fish for years, and he says he was taken slightly out of context. Now,
yeah, he continues to this day to say that he was misquoted, but I mean, the evidence is pretty damning.
It is pretty damning. But I also saw something this week which is very interesting, because there's lots of similarities between investing and weather prediction. It's uncanny, and I often draw analogies when I do things for 80/20 Investor, because it helps people understand. Now, at the time Michael Fish, there was something that was an unknown phenomena that occurred during that freak weather event of the Great Storm that caused the high winds. If you want to know about it, go and Google it and read about it. But there was basically the jet stream came flying out of the sky and came down and vertically and hit the southeast, which was something they'd never seen before. And of course, the meteorologists learnt from that event and have used that in their future predictions. Now, I think people who are boldly predicting that we couldn't have a similar event like Black Monday are in danger of doing a Michael Fish and setting themselves up for a fall. Now it can feel that things have moved on, and it means it's less likely. I mean, I mentioned those circuit breakers earlier, but I'm not sure they could totally stop it happening. But personally, I think that it is very likely that we're going to have another event. Now, the thing is, I don't know when that will be. It could be next week, it could be next month, it could be in years' time. So, the point is, Black Monday, I think, is likely to happen again. Another event just like it. Perhaps it won't pan out the same. And Ophelia and the Great Storm are quite good analogies for this. You can have an event that can be just as devastating, but because it affects different people in a slightly different way, it might not get the moniker of a Black Monday or Black Wednesday or something like that. Like I said, China had its own version in 2015, but no one talks about it much anymore unless you're into investing. So it hasn't. If you Google Black Monday, you don't get the China incident back in 2015. So that just shows you that these things do occur, perhaps more frequently than people realise, and we may get one. That the world is far more connected. And there's another issue that we have, is that there's an emphasis on high frequency trading and be able to trade quickly, and so consumers can even do it. Now that makes the likelihood that everybody, or the chances that people will all en masse try and exit the market more likely, and that of course could be a problem. And I'll just do a throwaway bit on ETFs. So people say, does the wall of money in ETFs, because exchange traded funds didn't exist in the past, and does that mean that this big, huge amount of money in very liquid funds, which people could sell at any second if they wanted to and get out? With unit trust, it takes a little bit longer. Could that mean that it could exaggerate the problems? Possibly, it could do. But the one thing I would say is that there are fewer people in things like unit trust, and actually those cause their own problems, because managers have to sell lots and lots of shares, etc., to actually meet redemptions, and so they can actually end up having to try and predict future redemptions in a mass sell-off, and they sell too much, if that makes sense. So they can exaggerate the whole thing. So that is the Great Storm, Black Monday. Could it happen again? I think you're going to be pretty certain it is going to happen again. And I'm not going to be the next Michael Fish who turns around and says, no, don't worry about it. It's going to hit Spain.
Good, I enjoyed that. And actually, for anyone who's interested in investing and who wants to maybe take the next step, I very much heartily recommend the 80/20 investor service that Damien set up, a DIY investor service that empowers you to make the decisions. I'm going to roll a quick advert for that, and I'll see you on the other side.
Before we move on, Andy, I just wanted to quickly mention 80/20 Investor. Now, 80/20 Investor is my DIY investment service. Do go and check it out. I empower and teach people how to invest their own money. The service provides data-driven fund tables. The data is driven by my own unique 80/20 Investor algorithm, which I created. You also get stop-loss alerts, you get research articles and insights, you get market commentaries, monthly commentaries, and DIY investment lessons, but you also get access to my £50,000 portfolio, which is a portfolio of my own money, which I run live on the site for members to see, and it shows people how I use the service to maximise my returns. And in the first 2 years of doing so, I turned £50,000 into £59,500, which is a 19% return, beating investment managers, professional fund managers, financial advisors, investment banks, passive trackers in the market. So everybody can have a free 30-day trial of 80/20 Investor, and you can claim that by going to moneytothemasses.com and going and clicking on the 80/20 Investor hyperlink at the top of the page. So go and try the service. Let me know what you think of it, and I know from the feedback that you're going to love it. But for now, on with the show.
Okay, mobile phone contracts. It's hit the news recently, so you're going to tell us a bit more.
Now, mobile phone contracts are, I'm talking about the pay monthly ones, which are the type that a lot of people have. And we're pretty familiar with how they work. You want this new phone, whether it's an iPhone 7, 8 or whatever it is, and that phone will cost ridiculous amounts of money, £800 or whatever if you bought it in a shop. But you can have an expensive pay monthly contract, 40 quid a month or something, and you effectively get the phone either heavily discounted or free, and you have to sign up and be locked into a contract for maybe 2 years, paying that higher monthly rate, and then eventually you keep the phone, it's yours. But the issue is that at the end of that term, your phone bill doesn't drop. You now own the phone, you have effectively paid off the phone, but you are still paying the higher monthly rate for a phone you already own. Now, the Citizens Advice did some research into this to actually quantify the scale of the problem. And they worked out that people who go out of their contract, and I've done this, everyone tends to at some point do it. If you're not obsessed with having the latest phone and you sign up for a phone and then you think, when's my renewal day? I'm sure I'm due a new phone. Well, if you're that person, then typically people getting into the end of their fixed term of their contract are overcharged by £22 to £38 a month, depending on the phone they've got. If you've got a nice, shiny, expensive iPhone, for example, you're probably going to be charged towards the £38 end. And they reckon it affects 36% of British consumers. So that's more than 1 in 3 people. So 1 in 3 people walking around with a phone out there on a monthly contract are needlessly overpaying. I don't know, have you ever done that, Andy?
Yeah, just this year I had it in my diary, and because I kind of know how that contract works and the fact that you're totally overpaying. And yeah, I was about 3 months too late, so I've probably, between my wife and I, paid nearly £200 because we got shiny new iPhones between the two of us. So yeah, we've probably paid nearly £200 over what we should have done. Luckily, I've moved it over and we're now on a nice cheap contract, but absolutely.
Yeah, but I've done it too, and it's just one of those things. You've got better things to worry about, haven't you? You look at your phone works. We're in the world where consumers, if something works, you're likely to stick with it, and it's about convenience a lot of the time rather than price and saving money. And in the past, we've been in the situation, my wife and I, where things have been very much more hand to mouth, and that we've had to try and save money. And I remember once moving onto, I don't mind name dropping on this one because they were really cheap at the time. I remember moving onto a Tesco's SIM-only contract, and what it meant was that I was paying about £10 a month for the same equivalent service, which at that time Tesco were backed by O2, so they end up, you're actually still on one of the major networks often with these SIM-only contracts, and the deal was saving me over £20 a month on each phone, which is an incredible amount of money when you think about it. And you might not have certain perks on that plan, but to be honest with you, it's almost identical. And so the point of this piece is, if you are one of those people, what you should do, if you don't know if you're one of these people, you might not do, then check your contract or ring up your provider and ask them, and when you're due an upgrade, and then go and check on the comparison sites for SIM-only deals that do the equivalent, or have a look at your bills and see how much you're actually using versus what you're paying for, because you may find you don't use anywhere near as many minutes or texts or data than you think you do, and see if there's an equivalent SIM-only deal that will work for you, and then get the provider to unlock your phone, which they now have to do for free, and then you can get your pack code and move to the new provider if you want with a SIM-only deal. The alternative is that you could tell your current mobile phone provider that you want to do this, and they may have a deal that will be an equivalent, which they'll happily move you on to, will save you money. Now, I think that this should be changed. I think the rule should be that the price should drop. They shouldn't be able to keep overcharging you for something that you've actually entered an agreement into to pay for. So I don't, until the rules change, this is what we're left with. So make sure you do that comparison. You can save yourself quite a bit of money. Personally, when I was on the Tesco contract, I did find the service was a little bit shaky. There's not supposedly meant to throttle things on the big provider, so in that time it was O2. I mean, it just felt sometimes that I did wonder if my service from O2 was better, as good as some of their direct paid-for clients, but there's no evidence to suggest otherwise. But I didn't have any issues. It was only once the phone ground to a halt that I had to get a new phone that I ended up back on a different monthly contract. So there you go, Andy. There's the advice. The other thing I would quickly mention, there is a website called Unshackled.com. So Unshackled.com, which, interestingly, I know the guy who created it, the CEO of the company, and he used to work for Phones For You years and years ago. And he approached me probably about a year ago and said, look, I'm starting this new business, and what it does is it's like a comparison site, but it actually provides unlocked, untethered phones. You get a phone that you don't have to buy through a network to get it cheaper. What they do is they effectively arrange the finance not linked to a provider. And then you get a SIM card that you can choose. You can choose the plan you want from across all the range of providers. So it's a different way of buying a mobile phone, which may help with this issue.
So it's almost like separating out the two costs, almost, where you're sort of part paying for a phone and the contract. You've got the deal with untethered, so you got the deal with Unshackled, and then you can just pick and choose. Oh, I quite like that.
Yeah, I mean, I do have a look at it. Do feedback, as he asked me about it, and this just shows you that. Well, I suppose it's a positive, because he mentioned it to me a long time ago, and even though I knew the guy, I wasn't going to be particularly swayed to talk about it unless I knew about it and saw a use for it, and it fitted what we're talking about like now. So have a look, feedback. Because I'd be interested to see what people think about it, because it sounds like a good service. Anyway, on to the next thing, Andy.
Yes, indeed. Moving on, so we've got the FCA report looking into sort of financial lives, and it's pulled out some, well, quite shocking bits of information.
Yeah, this has got a lot of coverage this week, mainly on social media, actually, and people tweeting out certain stats from it. And what the FCA did is they're trying to work out the financial lives of UK consumers. They carried out a piece of research that asked 1,500 questions from to 12,000 people, and it was a mixture of face-to-face and sort of stuff over the internet, and to try and work out the trends that are out there. And there were some quite incredible stats, but perhaps you might say not surprising. For example, 24% of UK adults have little or no confidence in managing their own money, and 46% of all UK adults report low knowledge about financial matters. Now, that isn't that surprising, I suppose, if you think about it, because financial education is still pretty much non-existent or in its infancy in this country.
But you're pioneering that change, Damien.
Well, this is kind of the crux of why I'm saying this, is that I really want people to share what we do on Money to the Masses and this podcast and the videos and everything. This is why I get out of bed when I've got a bad back, is because I do believe that we aren't preparing people and helping people to talk about money. We do just need to talk about money generally, like that we do, Andy. And people would like the review we had earlier, just appreciate a level that's non-nonsense, not patronising in any way, and talks about it in a real world. Like we're quite open about the mistakes that we make in the past. We're all human. And I think by doing that, we might be able to move this tide. I'll give you another stat. There's apparently 17 million UK adults with car insurance don't know what no claims protection means. And it just shows you that the industries out there, the financial services, use terms that people don't understand, despite the fact that they're commonly used, like no claims protection, where you can pay to protect the fact that your premiums are lower because you've not made a claim. I mean, I personally don't ever pay for that. I just think it seems to be loads of these things have loopholes, but there you go.
I just think it's funny that insurance companies find ways to basically put insurance on insurance. At what point is that going to move to protecting your protection on the no claims? Do you know what I mean? Insurance on insurance on insurance on insurance.
Yeah, and that gives you another example that they tag on things like motor legal protection. And the idea of that, it covers legal costs involved in like reclaiming uninsured losses after an accident that wasn't your fault. But they tag it on, but you can actually get that free. And going all the way back in a wonderful loop back to Lee that I mentioned earlier, who actually works for, I think he works for a firm called Free Motor Legal. You can actually sign up and get that for free. You don't have to pay for it. So Google that, freemotorlegal.co.uk, and you'll see that you can sign up. You don't actually have to pay for that add-on on a policy. So it's things like that we need to spread the word about and get people to understand what they're paying for. And so my point of this is that there's the government, the FCA, the financial services industry. There's not enough joined up thinking to help solve these problems. They actually worked out that 15 million Brits don't have a pension. And that's an incredible stat, but it's not surprising. Again, you need some joined up thinking. I'll say it now. If anybody out there is on these committees with the government or whatever, and they want my input into this, and now I'm not saying I have the answers to everything, but we do deal with a few million people a year and talk about this stuff a lot, and it's basically my job. But one of the reasons I firmly believe that we don't have people paying into pensions now, auto-enrolment, which is where your employer has to offer a pension and pay into it for you, helped start to solve the problem, but it doesn't solve it on its own because the amounts are too low. But the reason that people I fundamentally believe, don't pay into a pension is because credit is too easily available.
Yeah.
Now, why would you pay into a pension? The idea is that you're meant to save for tomorrow, but if you can borrow for tomorrow, why would you save for it? So what that actually does is that changes people's mindset into being spenders rather than savers. And why would you ever save for retirement when that idea of being in this life where you can be worry-free, have money where you can go and buy and do what you want without actually having to work? You can do that with a credit card. And so the golden age of pensions, which included final salary pensions, I know, but the golden age of people really wanting to save into pensions was also the age where credit wasn't as easily accessible. But unless you get all that joined up thinking across the board and realising that we've got to have a change that it's going to be very slow, then you can teach people all the facts and figures about pensions and all these things, but it won't change anything. And anyway, that's my rant over. So some incredible stats. It just goes to show you, the reason I also mention it is in terms of a benchmark. You shouldn't beat people up with these stats. This just shows the reality of the situation. And if you're making any small movement in the right direction, even paying any tiny amount, £10, £20 a month into a pension, you are doing far more than 15 million people in this country, and you shouldn't be criticised. I think you should be patting yourself on the back, because it's always these small steps. Every journey begins with a single step, doesn't it, Andy?
It does. We're done for this week. So yeah, spread the love. What Damien's trying to say there is he can help you, your friends, your family, and everyone else. So if you feel like we're doing you a good service, do share the word about the podcast, about moneytothemasses.com, on social media and things like that. It really is helping Damien reach a larger audience, which is all he wants to do. He just wants to reach more and more people and help more and more people. He gave up a very, very good, cushy job in the City of London helping rich people get richer, and he got fed up with it. He wants to help the masses, and you can help him do that. So yeah, do get in touch if you need to. Damien at moneytothemasses.com. moneytothemasses.com or podcast at moneytothemasses.com. Twitter's always a good way as well. It's at moneytothemasses with the number 2. Damien, we're done.
We're done, Andy. So that's it. I'm just fingers crossed my back keeps improving and I can go and watch Liverpool versus Tottenham at the weekend.
Yeah, and on your back thing, I do think the irony of you taking out a policy which gave you slightly cheaper gym cover, and the fact that now you might have to claim on the policy.
I tell you what, all you people laughing, at least I can laugh at myself, which I don't mind. My wife, my brother, everybody seems to laugh. If you can't laugh at yourself, then you need to cheer up. So yeah, hopefully I'll be back to normal next week, Andy.
Good. Until next week.
Until next week.
Don't forget to claim your free copy of Damien's best-selling book, The 30-Day Money Plan. Sort your finances in just 5 minutes a day, worth $4.99. Just go to moneytothemasses.com/podcast to find out how.